Hello, and welcome to another episode of Intune.training, the place to learn how to use Microsoft Intune, the Steve and Adam show with Adam and Ben.
Ben,
Hey,
the
Ben.
intern. Hey, how's it going, Adam?
I was going to say with Steve and Ben, and I was like, well, where am I at?
Yeah.
Hey, what's this is nuts.
It's been a minute. We obviously took a significantly longer break than we normally do because why not? The world is in chaos at the moment, so here we are.
That Christmas ham and turkey have just really just been weighing heavy on us. That tryptophan really hit hard after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, the tryptophan hit was a couple of weeks long this time instead of a couple of days.
So we promised everybody we would do something after the holidays, and Ben and I have been on for 4 hours now, screwing around with Power BI, and so here we are. But before we get started, Ben, crank that fan up.
Oh wait, I can do this.
Yeah, it's glorious. We need to make a GIF out of that. Jake, get on that for us, Jake.
Yes.
When you watch this video, Jake. All right. Anyway, that's enough goofing off. All right. So, Ben,
what are we doing? Okay, so we started today. We were going to talk about all sorts of crazy things. We ended up on a weird downward spiral into Power BI reporting, and I guess this is where we're at. So, okay, Adam had an idea that he wanted to report on some stuff from Intune, so like data that we can get from Graph in Power BI, and he wanted to have it available for all of his other employees and everyone that he works with to access, not just a PBIX file that's sitting on his computer. Like everyone that I know uses Power BI. He actually wanted to host this thing, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I wrote a blog post a couple of months ago where I explained that it's very easy to authenticate to Graph natively in Power BI. Big asterisk, it's apparently not super performant. It's not meant to be done, but you can do it because authenticating is very, very easy. So I gave you the file, and what happened?
It just the wheels just fell off, Ben.
And that is why I am still the intern.
Yeah,
Mike. So my solutions don't work.
So here's the thing. So I've been messing with Power BI for several years now, off and on, and when I get some moments where I can just get deep into it, I do. But over the last couple of months, or the last couple of months of last year, I was having to do a lot of API data querying. So not just Graph. We were trying to query the Citrix mobile platform that is not as good as Intune. To pull, we were doing iPhone conversion, and so we were trying to pull out data about that. And the issue is that it's really easy. I mean, really, it's not. It's like 15 lines, and you can put in your auth token and things to get to an API and do stuff in Power BI. But the moment that you publish it to PowerBI.com, the wheels fall off, and it's like, why is it not working? And the thing that's specific that I've run into over the last 2 years, and we literally had a breakthrough tonight with this. I finally found the missing piece. Is every time I publish it to the Power BI service, so there's Power BI Desktop, Power BI Service, there's Power BI Report Server, there's Power BI Report Builder, Power BI Report Builder for Report Server. So it just goes down and down and down. It's ridiculous. Every time you publish it to the service, PowerBI.com, which is the way that you are technically supposed to share your reports, you publish them there, they have failed. And it's not been obvious every time. And so fortunately, the code that Ben has for authing is very clever and is awesome. And I said, oh man, I'd love to use this, because what he's done is taken what I was doing in a bunch of individual queries and turned it into a function. And you just pass it a URL, and it does the auth for you, and then goes on to the URL that you pass to it. And that's just a super clean way to do this. And so I said, oh, that'd be great. I'd love to try it. Let me see if that fixes the issue I've been running into. And it didn't.
It was the exact, but it was the exact same thing, right? It was the exact same problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it didn't overcome the issue I was having, but I already knew the solution to how to rewrite the code that he provided so that we can now make the function work properly when published to the data gateway. And then we encountered a second issue. And so we've been banging at this for a bit so that we could make sure that we're showing the right things. And so we're going to talk through and just kind of simulate what we ran into and walk through each of those stages of this troubleshooting and show you how we got there. So number one, there's a blog post of Ben's that we'll link below so you can follow along. It's got a Power BI template published with it, and at the end of this video he will be uploading a replacement of that, or an updated version or something. He's going to be updating that post with some info, I think.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, I'm committing for him. And then you'll also find a link to a gentleman named Chris Webb, Chris Webb's BI blog, and he wrote a post about this in 2016 that explicitly talks about the issues that we ran into. We will try to talk a little bit about what the nuance of what we're changing and why that's significant. Chris's blog goes into much more detail about it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it comes down to like security and validating, Power BI being able to pre-validate the URLs that it's going to attempt to hit, and doing some that pre-validation needs to kind of be massaged in a certain way in order for it to.
Yeah, I think the essential takeaway from it, we haven't even got into showing you what we're doing, is the final solution here is that the URLs that you use need to be static, or Power BI needs to see them as static. If you can't do that, then it doesn't pre-validate things, and then it just falls over. So this is what we got to. There's a couple of other fun things about it, but pretty much that's sort of what it is. This is very advanced, and I apologize for this being the first video that we've that we're coming back in 2022. It's a deep dive into Power BI, but here we are.
But I think, yeah, it's whatever. It is what it is. It's the thing about it is that this is what we're working on. This is what we're into right now, and so this is what we're going to talk about. So we kind of regretted even not just recording the whole session of just watching us poke around at this and have these light bulb moments. So anyway, for reference, this is the post from Ben that we're going to reference, and then this is the post from Chris Webb. If it'll ever load, at some point it will come up. And so what I'm going to do is, we've already got the file, or I've already got the file downloaded on my test machine, and so this is the PBIT file that is at the bottom of Ben's blog post. So it's the PBIT. That's a template. If you are building Power BI to share, this is the way that you should. One of the way, and whatever. I'm not a Power BI expert. If you would like to share a file and have it cleaned up, and take your data out before you send it to someone, save it as a PBIT. Anything that you've created as a parameter, it will prompt someone to enter the data into, so that then when they load it, it loads all of their data, not your data in it. So nice, clean way to handle that. So for this, I'm going to put in some pieces of data that we will obfuscate, hopefully at some point, or I will be burning my tenant. Doesn't matter either way. So this is the tenant ID, client ID, and client secret. If you've done any graph automation, you know what those things are. If you haven't, go read through some of Ben's stuff. We'll talk through some of that. So what we're doing now is we're just essentially put in the credentials, and now it's doing a simple API call to the mobile apps resource in Graph. And whenever we grab this data, we should be able to just drag in the display name just to proof of life here.
Oh yeah, and just to point out, my template has no shiny graphs, because I get to a point where I can pull the data in, and then my 12-year-old brain immediately gets distracted, and I move on to something else. So
exactly.
This is why I'm not a Power BI report admin.
Yeah. So just a quick look behind the scenes. What we're getting here is a tenant ID. client ID, client secret, and then the resource that we put in is just simply the base URL that we want to hit. And then Ben, if you want to talk through these, I'll click through them. So these are two functions. If you haven't looked at Power BI functions, they're pretty cool. I'm going to go to Advanced Editor here.
Yeah, so this is in Power Query. I don't really know what the language is. I think it's like Power Query M or R. It's all very.
This is M. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, the only thing that makes this a function compared to like a normal advanced query is the first line where we're sort of parameterized all of the things. There we go. That's the term so we're essentially saying, hey, the end user is going to provide us these things, right? And each of these values are going to be as text. So you can see here we've got a tenant ID, client secret, resource, grant type, scope. These are all the things we need to create the request to Microsoft to get an auth header so that we can work with Graph.
Pardon me. I am embiggening the text.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
I feel like it was going to be a little small on my screen there. So just in case folks want to see what we're talking about.
Excellent. Very good. So yeah, so we've got the tenant ID, and you can see we're identifying that each of these values is text or whatever it is. Realistically, what everything that we're doing here is text. You can do other stuff with it, but that's outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. So once we've got those parameters, we're then going through and we're just setting a URL, which is going to be our and again, this is an important one. So we got stung on this, right? So we've got a dynamic URL. So this URL here is actually being generated dynamically each time we hit the function. So the tenant ID is being subbed in or being replaced. So we've got our URL, and then we fill in the body. So this is the request that we're sending. So this just tells login.microsoft.com who we are and what we actually want to do. So we're saying, hey, this is our resource. Here's our client ID, basically our username and password, and why we actually want to authenticate and how we want to authenticate. Once we've got that information, we compile the body thing into a binary blob that we're going to send as essentially a request payload. And then line 8 is the secret source. So we're literally doing a web content or like a HTTP request with the URL, which is the URL in line 3, and then options is that compiled to binary version of the body variable. Sounds complicated, but we're essentially just forming a web request. So the web contents. So that gets stored in this variable called response. We then convert that response out from JSON into something that we can do things with in Power BI. And then we grab the single thing that we need from that, which is the access token. So we convert that token. And then just so once we,
just from a readability perspective, just for reference, what we're doing, if it's not obvious, I just want to point this out. So these are concatenation characters, and we're combining text strings with variables. And so you see when I highlight this, it's highlighting this for me. These are the parameters being passed in, like you mentioned, and then all of these are where the parameters are coming. So he's got them all smushed together. I don't know why, Ben, but if you want to read it, put some spaces in it, and it's a little bit nicer. You don't have to have them all smushed together for this to function properly. Anyway, since we're talking through it, just want to clarify what that means. Okay, so I'm going to go grab the other piece of text here, the other function.
If anyone spent any time playing around with PowerShell or any kind of programming language or scripting language, functionally, this should be fairly easy to follow, right? You set your parameters, you do the things with the parameters, and this is kind of how you get that really nice template experience, because the code is reusable in a very, very obvious way. Okay, so this next thing that we're looking at here is so we've got two functions that we actually never really intentionally query the auth function that we looked at initially. We're gonna query that through another function. So there's a level of abstraction.
Sorry, I was trying to make this slightly less PowerShell-y, but I don't know that's gonna help. I'm sorry.
If you change it to R, change the language to R, and it will work.
Is R listed here?
It's close enough. Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, it is. Okay, perfect.
There we go.
Nope, didn't work. So I was trying to get rid of. This is not a comment. This is the.
Oh, sure.
I was trying to make sure that it's obvious. These are not commented out lines. These are, you put the hash in front of specific, like, so they've got the dash in the name, and so you've got to quote it and hash it. So it's just a way to declare a variable properly in here.
It's pretty much, yeah, anything that's got a non-alphanumeric character in it. So spaces, dashes, things like that. They need to have hashes there.
Anyway,
cool.
Carry on.
Okay, so this is actually the function that we will leverage whenever we want to create a new table of data. So whenever we want to query something in Graph, right? So we've only got one URI, one parameter, which is the graph URL. So what is the full URL that we're going to query? We create the auth header by referencing the other function. So that's that Get-AuthenticationHeader with all of the tenant details, client secrets, all that sort of stuff, everything that we've just gone through.
And so this, so if this helps, this is the function Get-AuthenticationHeader.
Yeah.
And then this is the other function that we'll be calling.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right. So once we've got our
calling that with the parameters.
Yes, that's right. So once we've got our auth header, which arguably is the hardest part of Graph, really just once you understand that, everything's very, very simple. So once we've got that auth header, we then create our headers, which literally just tell us, hey, here's our auth token. So this is what lets us get in and do the stuff. The second line is the content type. So what's actually going to come back, which is almost always application JSON. So JSON data. We then go down to line 28, which is, again, that sort of magic line that is just creating the URL query. So we've got the graph URL and then the options. The options contain the headers. And then we're just passing out the response from that into a JSON format. And then everything else is kind of Power BI magic, right? So we're getting the value out of the JSON content. We're then converting it from a list of values into a table. And then we're expanding the table out into field names and records. And this is very Power BI-ish and complicated, and there's not a lot of need to sort of understand how this works, except that it does, and it's awesome.
Yes.
I say all of this knowing that this doesn't work.
Yes, but it works. I mean, it does work, but it
does work.
And so then here's the last piece. I'm not going to put it in the what you call it, but can you just zoom in here?
You can't zoom in, no. But so what's interesting about this is if you grab that URI, I just want to show everyone sort of how this works. So if you just copy that, right, and then we just close out of this. Let's create a new. Are you
gonna make me go to a browser?
No. I'm getting in Power BI. We're going to create a new table of data just to show you sort of functionally how this is supposed to work. So if you go into Invoke-GraphRequest.
I was opening up a whole brand new one.
Yeah.
Actually, we should, because what's going to happen is when it made auth us weird. No, never mind.
It should be fun. So just go into. No. Don't even need to do that. Just click on Invoke-GraphRequest.
Oh, okay. Yep. Sorry. I thought I was headed a different direction. Okay.
So if we click, even just change that to me, just so that we can. Actually, that's not going to work. Users. Put users in. So beta. Yeah. Get rid of all that. Just put in users, and then just invoke. So this is. We
have to tell it it's an anonymous.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yep.
Couldn't authenticate the credentials with the credentials provided.
Sure.
And that's not great.
And connect.
No.
Awesome.
Except if you put in this is one of the weird quirky things of Power BI, because if we were to change it to an organizational account, the moment we do that, it's going to say this doesn't support. You can't pass in a token to the organizational access, and so therefore it gets silly.
Yeah, it's fine. So whatever.
Let's here.
Yeah,
it did. Look, it doesn't work now. We've broken it all the way.
We have.
What in the world has happened now? Look at that. That actually works there. But then we do it's a literally wow.
No, it's there.
We fixed it. Okay, no idea. So the point is that this is now a function that lets you pass in any graph URL to it to be able to just create a dynamic. So imagine you're doing SQL tables and you know the name of the SQL table. You just go and add it. You just connect to the database and you connect to SQL. You just tell it, here's my SQL query. It's the same thing, except there's this aggravation of having to go pull down an auth header that you then can pass to graph with the URL to get the thing you want to get. And so it's just, it is what it is.
It's
but
literally, so like I wrote this solution very much like, so if you understand PowerShell, we've created a function that only takes a very small amount of parameters so that you don't need to understand how it works. It's, it goes into a conversation we were having offline around abstraction. It's arguably not a great way to do it, but at least you can sort of drill in and really see what it's doing if you wanted to understand what the code was doing, so that you can just get that data. And then you can make some fancy tables to make your manager happy. You get the pay rise and everyone cheers for you.
yeah.
So, okay, so this works, right? We can get that data. It's fantastic. But the next thing that failed was what Adam was trying to do was, okay, so I've created this table. I've got this amazing report that I want everyone else to have access to. So you're going to publish it. And then I guess that's where I want to see sort of what happens so that we can fix it.
And so before we publish it, I'll just show you what that is. So if you've got a Power BI license, you go to powerbi.com. Actually, you don't have to have a license maybe to get here. I don't know. We're not licensed people, so if you can't get here, you might need a license. If you can, then great. You probably have a license. I don't know. Okay, so we have no reports, no dashboards, no data sets. So we're going to tell it to publish. So the workspace that I have here is called my workspace, and that's this. So I know that that's where it's going to go. If I had a new workspace, wanted to create a new one, I would see it in the list here. So I'm going to hit select, and in a minute, it's going to upload this file and all of the data set, or create a data set and a report to separate items in powerbi.com. So I can click this to get there, or I've already here. So I'm going to just refresh, and I should now see T because I'm too lazy. So there's my report and my data set. So if I go and click my report, I've got a nice, cool, very vanilla table.
So right now,
to look at.
If you were just playing along and you didn't really know much about Power BI, I would be like, this amazingly titled report, T, has got this data. That's done, right? We're finished.
Published. Done.
Happy days. Everyone, we now have a list of all of the applications that we found in our environment. Let's move on, right?
But if we attempt to refresh, this is deceptive because this refresh only refreshes the visuals. It does not actually refresh the data on the report. So the data is tied to the data set. So if we go to the data set, we can now see, oh, I can have a refresh here. So I can hit refresh now. And that went really fast. Bet if I go to my data set and I go to settings, oh boy, look at that. You can't schedule a refresh for this data set. Okay, and if I look at my refresh history on demand, data set includes dynamic data source. Since dynamic data sources aren't refreshed in Power BI service, this data set won't be refreshed. Click here to learn more. And if you go here, it just reiterates that, yep, you can't do that. And it gives you nothing else like, oh, go change this, go fix this, go do a thing.
It's really unhelpful.
And I've spent like months over the last couple of years like messing with this, trying to, I mean, it hasn't taken me that long to figure it out, but it's just been a continual source of frustration. Every time I come back to this months later, I'm like, oh, start over and everything. So it's like, well, why does Power BI let me add this here? It's just a web call. Why is it having trouble? And so if you go and you query for this, you probably will end up on Chris Webb's blog. And what it will talk through here is essentially the idea that, as Ben was kind of saying in the beginning, there's this whole static URL thing. And so if you look at his example here, he's got this URL and it looks to be hard coded. Like it's got one parameter, but it's like, why would this be a thing? This seems to work fine. Why is that not a thing? And so when we're looking at it and looking at the error, it says this is dynamic. It's like, well, it's not dynamic. I've got a URL here. What's the deal?
So then the important thing to point out is if we go back to the example command or code, what's essentially happening here is if we go up to so the Web.Contents URL. Okay, so the URL line 6. It should be pretty obvious to anyone here that, so the error that we're getting is that it's dynamic content. And the issue that it's dynamic content is because there is a parameter that has not been expanded before it actually runs. So that's the issue here. If it was just logon.microsoft.com, then it wouldn't be a dynamic URL. So we need to figure out a way to go, okay, we know that this is going to change, but there's got to be a way. And the key thing here is the library, or the thing that we're actually querying here, is Web.Contents. So the Web.Contents subroutine
function,
method,
whatever, yeah,
has to have some kind of way that we can say, look, the URL is this, but we're going to change some things in a very deliberate way. But can you please just only focus on like one part of it being static?
Yeah.
And the key thing here is that when Power BI works, it's looking for a static URL that it can verify before it does things. I don't know enough about why it does that, but it needs it. And this is the important thing. So like, you can see here that he's played around with all this query stuff. We don't need the query stuff. So specifically with the authentication.
Exactly.
Yeah,
His request is, or his sample here is using query, and it's like, oh, that's great, but I'm not doing a query. I'm doing an inline string, and I've got to. What do you do now?
So this is where we got into RelativePath as a value. So Web.Contents has a couple of parameters that we can provide. And
by the way, I've clicked to the next in his series here, and you can see where we're headed.
Yeah. So line 3 in this example, RelativePath equals hello. This gave us the idea that, hey, maybe this is what we need. What is RelativePath? RelativePath has got to be the solution, right? So we started playing around with this, and we got somewhere. I think potentially we ran into some more problems, but I guess this is the next step that we'll go in and sort of show you how we rewrote the solution.
Yeah. So we're going to take a, let's see here. Okay. On this post, he showed how to use the, okay, let's see. Let me double check, because I want to make sure we're giving you the right piece of the code, because he's bounced around with it a few times at this point, and so it's kind of a question of, all right, well, you know, are we even now as I'm looking this, I'm wondering.
No, this is all correct.
Maybe there's still a thing, but ultimately, yeah. So, okay, so what he's referencing here, and I know we're getting in the weeds, but once sorry, we just got to get the story out. It'll make sense, I promise. So one back. Okay, so he talks about in this one, use the skip test connection option on the data source to avoid this. Except you have to be able to get that far. And as you found here, we're not that far. So it's like, oh, okay, so it doesn't mean that we don't have to go this route. We still have to refactor our code this far for then this piece to work for us. So that's what we're going to do first. So we're going to go through and we're going to refactor that code to make it work. Now, we're not going to make you sit through us doing that. We are going to just go to the desktop here where I've already got one in the oven.
And we'll just grab that code and chuck it back into the
video. And so this is, yeah, I mean, it's just been one of those, like, this has to work. This has to work. And so I just installed Power BI Gateway on this machine because as part of this test. And the issue is at my office, we have a gateway that we have to use. And, or when we publish, the gateway's there. And so it automatically hooks into some of the things when you publish and that kind of deal. And I'm going to try to see can I change can I zoom this in just a little bit? I can't. It's an RDP and it's not going to work. All right, we'll be all right. So ultimately, you know, I've kind of been keying in on the gateway as being a thing, and it turns out this is nothing to do with the gateway. It has everything.
It's not a gateway problem at all.
Yeah, it's not. So
okay. So let me just explain a little bit here. So this is not a PBIT file. This is a PBIX file. So we've created a Power BI report file or workbook from the PBIT, and then we have gone in. So you can see obviously all the parameters have been filled in.
Yeah. So but basically, once you save it, it becomes a PBIX file.
That's correct.
I'm gonna
And
show
then
'em
what
side
we've
by side.
done, what we've done is we've gone in and we've modified the functions, and that's all we needed to do. Well, okay, we needed to tweak the functions a little bit and then tweak what we're sending into one of the functions to sort of use this concept of the relative path. So let's go right into the get auth header.
Well, sorry, let's talk about this real fast. Okay, so
Sure.
on the original, on the left, we had tenant ID, client secret resource, and I've now added Microsoft login because we need this URL as a, or we don't, it doesn't have to.
You don't need
whatever.
it.
I like
but it's-
variabilizing as much of this stuff as I can because you get to
Correct.
surface it out here. And what's great is if you build this properly, or roughly, if you have a similar auth header thing to a different API, it makes it much more reusable if you surface these things out here.
Yes.
In my
correct.
opinion. So that's kind of how I'm building things when I'm building. So, okay, so we're gonna go back into the manage or get authentication header over here, and then we should be able to do them side by side. Oops. Sorry if if you can't read this text, go open up the 2 off of Ben's site or something, or go look at his code. Because we need to show them side by side. Hopefully you can see these enough in the video.
Yeah. So the key thing to point out here is the difference. The key differences where we've got response. Actually, you know what? Just copy the new one into VS Code, and we can just compare them side by side.
There. Oh yeah, we can just do that, huh?
Yeah, we can. Just open a new thing and then drag that across to the right.
Yeah. I do know this part.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. And I'm going to take, well, I'll just leave this down here. We could do the compare function.
Oh, that's fine.
Let's not
stress that. Okay. Let's not stress too much.
No. Okay. I'm going to make them both R for us here. We're making this up as we go, folks. All right. Okay.
All right. So the key thing that we're really playing around with here is on the new one, line 5. So relative path.
Start on line 3.
Sure. Okay. So on line 3, so we've created tenant ID, which is our static address. So tenant ID is our tenant ID, and OAuth token. So this is the back half of the address compared to the URL where we've got login.microsoft.com and then all of that stuff. We're now just creating the back half of the query. So it's tenant ID and OAuth to /token. So this is the relative stuff that changes in a dynamic way that it was causing problems. Okay. Line 4 doesn't change. The body is still fine. We are not converting the body to binary directly underneath that. We're going to do that later. But then this is sort of
I'm going to mess with your brain here, but I'm going to do this for the purpose of discussion. So we variabilized this a minute ago, like I was showing you, but for the purpose of discussion, this makes much more sense to understand what we've done.
Correct. So line 5 is the new magic, and this is kind of what fixes the problem for us, right? So we're still doing the web.contents, but what we're doing is the URL is now a static URL. So it's always going to be login.microsoft.online.com. And then we're adding this magic stuff underneath here. So line 7 to line 10, we're literally saying, hey, we're going to add in a relative path, and relative path is going to be relative path. It's confusing, but we're literally just saying, just chuck this onto the back of the URL. This is a relative location to where we actually want to go, right? So this actually fixes that error because the URL is now static. And at the time of compile, at the time of we actually run the report refresh, it's going to chuck that onto the end of the URL, and we're going to get past that error. The next part here, content equals text to binary body, is just what we were doing in the options section on the previous one. But we're now, because we're doing this relative path thing, we kind of need to do it all in this format. It doesn't matter why we need to do that. We just need to. So just understand that everything we were doing beforehand.
So Ben, as I'm looking at this, I'm calling an audible on this because
I feel like 100%.
I feel like we were, we tried multiple things, and so we kind of got here, and then we could have done this just a wee bit different to make the two look the same for the purpose of discussion here. So if we do this, we can just pass options back in, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And so if we do this like this, or whatever, I'm gonna leave them on 2 lines, but you can string them all back together, and then we do options like that. Okay.
Yes.
Close that down there, something. Okay, so then we take this back out, and we still need that last comma around that.
Yep, that's good. So this 100% is exactly the same output. It kind of, at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter. The important thing here is that we need this relative path and we need the content to be in this framework.
I'm trying to make.
It's very late / early in the morning for Adam, and he's getting very excited.
Yeah, but watch. Okay, so if we rework it all to make it match, what we're going to do here is, so you've got URL over here, but in this case, so you're passing in this whole string. Okay? Yeah. So if we essentially take out the URL here, just imagine that's not there, and then we stick this down here for URL, and then we hit enter. We have options, and we have that. And so let's just delete that altogether so we don't see it.
And then get rid of the tenant ID OAuth2 token stuff on line 8.
No. That stuff so I'm saying on the left is still the old way of doing it.
Oh,
what
sure.
I'm trying to illustrate. So if we were to factor it all out and like whatever, that's what I'm trying to do. So
yeah,
essentially what we need to make happen though is you put the base URL in, and then take everything else after the slash and put it in the relative path. And just make a habit of doing that with your Power BI queries. And I think, period, regardless of like what you're going to query, what you're going to hit, any of that kind of stuff, just do the base URL and do relative path for the rest, and it's just going to work. So
that's correct.
That's really the story here.
That is the story. But okay, so we made these changes. We know that the code now works in the way that we want it to. Locally, it works exactly the same as the other one, right? Because
before we go, so we did also make the same change here, slightly, which was the resource that we're passing in. So if we go here to the mobile apps,
yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So on mobile apps, we're passing in the full URL. It's got the same problem because we're passing in the full thing, and we need to break it up. So it changes the way the function works, which means we have to pass in the relative path piece instead of, and so we're getting the resource from here anyway. So we're going to get the resource as the variable, and then we're going to get the relative path on the request. And so like earlier in our demo, we did users. If we wanted to do the same thing, we would just simply do beta users would be our new way to invoke that same request.
And look at that, we get that data straight away.
It worked. Okay, so great, cool, awesome, that worked. And so let's close and apply. And then we're going to publish this up. I feel like I should put some data on the page just so we see something. Okay, this is on the left side is the old one. I'm just going to fill that. All right, so this is our new one, and we're going to drag mobile apps onto the desktop here. And we're going to now publish or save. It'll ask you to save before you publish. We're going to publish that to the My Workspace. It has an actual full name. Looks prettier, nicer. All right, so we should be golden, right? Let's do it.
Should, right?
Do the thing.
What could possibly go wrong?
Oh. And this is where the wheels fall off, because you go through all this and you're like, I got it, I did the thing, I did it. Then, okay, so we don't have a refresh yet. So let's go ahead and it should generally auto refresh whenever you load it. It may have now that we've got it finished. Did it finish over here? Yep.
Oh, just to point out that this workspace has now got a slightly better name. Not that T is not a great report name, Adam. I feel like
slightly better.
Slightly better.
I named
it just has more letters.
I named both of them. I'm capable.
Yeah,
listen, I need to sometimes. Now see, we've been proven wrong because it just worked. But there's a thing. Okay, so it's because we've already messed with this and
we've already played around.
Okay, so what will generally happen is you'll get here and it will tell you you haven't entered credentials, and so you need to do something. Well, as we saw earlier, all we're going to have is anonymous and basic for this URL, and we know that because we're going to be passing in an auth token, we don't need to pass it user credentials, so we just want to go anonymous. But what I had been running into here was when I was setting up these data connections, I was setting them up as none or private for the whatever that was called, the author,
The
privacy level.
Yeah.
Privacy level.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you set it up as none, or you set it up as private, you get an error like this. And sometimes you get this other one that's this mashup error. It's not even clear to me why you get that one sometimes, but not others.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
it's you do the gateway versus not gateway. That's
Maybe.
I think that's it. So we can show that in a minute. But essentially, when you do this, if you're going to do a web query and you need to query across multiple sources, and in the case of graph, you always will, you
Yeah.
need to set this to organizational or public, or else you will get this will not work. You will not be able to refresh your data through this gateway. There's essentially a firewall, or what would you call the CORS, CORS?
Oh, yeah. It's a
type.
cross originating resource schema, something like that. Whatever.
We
It's
think that's the issue. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the problem.
Now I wonder if I've got one set to public and one set to organizational, will they work? I doubt it. That's my guess.
Let's find out. Let's find
But
out.
we know that both of those work.
Mm-hmm.
But do they both work when they are different than each other? And they don't. Look at that. So we set them to both or I'll do organizational because we want to be semi-secure. Now you notice we do have the skip test connection on this. And the issue here is that if you do an anonymous connection to this, Graph's going to blow up and say, oh, you can't, or login Microsoft.com will blow up. And so we want to make sure it doesn't need to test that connection because it won't work until it has the auth token.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we trust that this is going to be online. If it's offline, there's bigger problems, right? But as Adam was saying, you can't test connection to graph.microsoft.com without it expecting authentication. So we're just going to skip that with the hope that it's always going to be online.
Look at that. It's taking a lot longer.
That's awesome.
I either need to refresh the whole page or it's just working. Give it a second. Okay, and so there we go, completed. Okay, so we know that they have to be the same as well. So that's cool. We're learning things. Okay, so you'll notice that we've talked about the data gateway, but we haven't really done anything with that yet. So I have installed a data gateway, and literally you just hit install and then log in and magic happens and it connects your data gateway. So what we're going to do is tell it we want to use the on-prem data gateway. Now, it's telling us, oh, it's not configured correctly. What are we going to do? Oh, no, oh, no. Well, that's because, pull that arrow down, it's going to tell you, in order to use the gateway, you have to add these data sources to the gateway if you want to use it for them. And Ben, I think that actually my issue previously with this has been I was using SQL and web query APIs at the same time. And so I have to use the gateway for the SQL queries. And I think maybe sometimes that triggers it to use to need to have these registered as data sources.
That would make sense. I think it would be very much the same as you need to make sure that both of them have the same privacy scope. You probably need to also send the request through the same location. Yeah.
And so as a gateway administrator, I can come here and I can add the web source type, and there's a whole bunch of types of data sources: anonymous, skip test connection, and then organizational or public. Yeah. And this is a thing that now you can communicate to your data gateway administrator. If you, like me, are not one, you get to fix that. Now, once we've added it, see, we have to then map it. Okay, so we can map to that for that one, and then on this one we'll do the next one.
And I'd just like to point out while we're doing this as well that I just setting those URLs to static and just seeing them appear in this screen as unique entries is not something that I ever really thought about before, because whenever I've sort of developed these sort of solutions, I've never thought about the final, like, publishing them to the public workspaces or even the organizational workspaces. But it was once we sort of understood the idea around the relative paths, it just fixed all of this, and I just can't believe how simple it was. I also can't believe how long it took us to realize how simple it was.
I mean, this is embarrassingly a long time. I have several Power BI reports that have gone through lots of steps to get here, and they are going to get gutted. And I think I'm going to be able to accelerate my API development stuff because of this now. So
that's fantastic.
But there you go. So completed successfully, and so they're essentially doing exactly the same thing. We are no longer managing this. The admin is doing this, so I don't have to do this, and they're just mapped here to entries on the gateway. So
that's awesome.
So ultimately, we have kind of, okay, if we circle back here and we come back in and look at our data source, ultimately, what Ben has made is, I think, the key. I mean, these functions are really amazing because this just allows you to, every time you need a graph thing, you just go hit this one every time. This is what I was trying to do. And every time I was doing it, I was having to take all of the code from this one and all the code from this one and and this one and merge them all together in order to, for every single graph query I was doing. And it was like, I don't know why, but I just finally gave up. I said, I know this way is going to work. I'm just going to do it because I can't handle this anymore. And so I just moved forward with what I could get working. And so like, this has been amazing. So I'm excited about this. Hopefully you've stuck with us this long. But Ben's gonna get us some updated code out there for us if you're interested in using this. We hope that folks take this and run with it and build cool things on it. All that good stuff. Ben, thanks for all the help. Thanks for sticking with me. I know this has been a long Saturday for you already.
That's okay. That's fine. It's not like I've been stuck inside all week, and today is my one day that I could be free. But here we are. We've played around with Power BI for 4 to 5 hours. And I couldn't imagine anything more fun to do on a Saturday. So as Adam has said, like, this is fantastic. Like, I genuinely believe that, like, this sort of stuff, and I wrote this specifically to try and get people to really lean into the idea that graph is not scary. It's not hard. You just need to get past the hump of authentication. And this hopefully fixes that. And now that we've, fixed the problem of, okay, but it didn't work when we published it, we've now got a really, really dynamic solution that potentially gets you to a final solution a lot quicker than you previously did. So play around with it. If you've got any questions, obviously leave them in the comments. If things don't work, let me know. I always enjoy being told that things don't work. But yeah, I just hopefully this has been helpful for you. I don't use Power BI anywhere near enough in my day-to-day work environment, so it's been cool to work with you, Adam, to try and get this working.
Well, thank you very much for sticking with me. And just one last piece. I know we kind of said this at the top, but just as a reminder, I don't believe Microsoft really wants you querying graph for tons of data through Power BI. There's other mechanisms to do this, but there definitely are some use cases where you can get some value out of doing this. And so we're gonna do it because it's useful.
Exactly. And look, that is a good question to end on. But here's one for everyone that maybe has made it to the end of this. If you are interested in the alternate solution to arguably the way that Microsoft wants you to do this, which is to have a middleware solution, which is something that I call it, where the data is stored external to Power BI and you just talk with that data that's sort of pre-captured. Let us know in the comments, because it's something that I've done and I did years and years and years ago before I sort of really played around with this thing, to only realize that I was kind of told quietly, maybe don't do that. It's not really designed to work in such a dynamic way. So if anyone's curious, we can do another video on that. I know this is tangentially linked to Intune, and Power BI is maybe less exciting than Intune stuff, but it is something that I enjoy talking about. So let us know if you're curious, and we'll do that video as well.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Ben. It's been fun. We'll talk to you guys later.
Awesome. See you later.